Hello, Crime Squad podcast listeners. I'm your host, Natasha, and I welcome you back to Crime Squad podcast. This podcast features Canadian true crime, both solved and unsolved, and is researched, written, and produced by yours truly. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss any of the episode releases, as well as any bonus content I might put out. A word before we get into this episode. Support is available for anyone affected by this podcast and the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Immediate emotional assistance and crisis support are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, through a national hotline at 1-844-413-6649. This podcast contains details of violence against Indigenous women and may not be for every audience. Discretion is advised. There is a very important day in May. May 5th each year is Red Dress Day and is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. In many, if not all, Indigenous belief systems, women are sacred. They are powerful beings who can bear life and should therefore be respected and recognized for their strength. Two-Spirit is a term to describe Indigenous peoples with a distinct gender identity, one that includes both a female and a male spirit. But Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals are consistently devalued in society. What began in 2010 as an impactful art installment has turned into a National Day of Awareness, thanks in part to Métis artist Jamie Black. Jamie collected 500 red dresses, one for every missing and murdered Indigenous woman across Canada. If you're thinking that number seems small compared to the relative population of Canada, consider this. The Indigenous population in Canada is just 4.3% of the total population. When seen in context, 500 women is staggering. In just 5 years, that number turned from 500 into 1,200, as reported by CBC in a 2015 article. Artist Jamie Black's goal with the collection of the dresses was to install them in public locations as a reminder of the fallen and stolen sisters. And that's exactly what she did. In Canada, more than 6 out of 10 Indigenous women have experienced physical or sexual assault in their lifetime, and this is a direct result of colonization. The statistics are disturbing, to say the least, and paint a picture of violence and systemic racism across Canada. Indigenous women are 4 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to be victims of violence. And sadly, from 2001 to 2014, the average rate of homicides involving Indigenous female victims was 4 times that of those involving non-Indigenous women. This constantly present devaluation appears to embolden people to think hurting or killing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals is okay. But it's not. It's not okay. Taking another person's life is not okay, regardless of gender, sexuality, race. The list goes on. It's the responsibility of all Canadians to work toward eradicating this awful reality. And that can start with education. Look at the Truth and Reconciliation document. Understand the issues affecting Indigenous peoples in our country. Today's episode is about 4 Indigenous women who had their lives taken away by the same man. A man who more than likely would have continued to kill if he wasn't caught. Okay, squad, let's get into today's case. It's mid-March 2022 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's cold. Temperatures are often well below 0 degrees Celsius. Things have happened in your life, some things you aren't proud of, but you try your best to deal with situations as they come up. Right now, you're in your mid-20s and you're living on the streets. Your daily life is trying to stay warm and find food or a place to sleep that's safe. As an Indigenous female, you know all too well about the dangers that lurk around every corner. The night of March 15th, it's very cold. Your stomach is empty, your feet and hands are freezing. You don't have adequate clothing to protect you from the cold. Nothing sounds better than a warm house, a hot shower, and a hot meal. You want this so badly, you're willing to do just about anything. So when a man approaches you and he's kind and offers you shelter, the little voice that tells you not to take him up on this offer is pushed down deep inside. All of you tries to fight the idea, but life on the streets is like a choose-your-own-adventure book. If you don't go, could there be a worse fate just around the corner? So you leave with him. You tell yourself you're tough. If he tries anything funny, you can take him. He isn't going to hurt you. What kind of person would he be if he offered you a space to warm up, eat, and take a shower just to attack you? Not everyone is an evil person. Still, the warnings from your aunties and grandmother ring in your head. Don't trust anyone, especially not a white man. Your toes and fingers are numb from the cold, your stomach shriveled from lack of food. You ignore the voices in your head saying no, and you go with him. But you were wrong. You couldn't fight him off, and you are never seen again. While that piece of this episode is fictional, it's not far from the reality of many vulnerable people in society. The streets are a tough place to be. It can be lonely, it can be scary, and it can be incredibly difficult. The reality of this particular woman is as follows. In mid-March of 2022, a young woman in her mid-20s met a man in Winnipeg. The details of her life are unknown. The circumstances in which she met the man are unknown. More than likely, the woman was experiencing some challenges in life, whether it be mental health related, drug related, or poverty related. The sad reality is that this woman would be murdered and would never be identified. She would be the first victim of a budding serial killer in Winnipeg, and the community would desperately try to identify her without success. She would be given the name Mashkodi Bizi-Ikwe, or Buffalo Woman, by a group of advocates, knowledge keepers, and grandmothers. Life is sacred, and being labeled as an unknown victim didn't feel right to the community. Thelma Morrisseau, also known by Danima, provided insight into the spiritual beliefs and teachings in Indigenous culture related to naming an unknown individual with a spirit name. In essence, providing a name to Buffalo Woman ensures she will be recognized and acknowledged in the spirit realm. Toby Jolly, a program coordinator at Kana Kanichik, an Indigenous social services organization, was part of the group to determine a name befitting of the woman. And she said, quote, "Whether or not we know her name, she has one. Whether or not we know her family, she has one. And we wanted to honor that in her." End quote. Toby went on to say the name was chosen because of the teaching of Grandmother Buffalo, the Buffalo Spirit, who gives her name to those who don't have spirit names yet. Winnipeg police also adopted the name Buffalo Woman to identify the victim out of respect for Indigenous knowledge keepers, elders, and leadership. Buffalo Woman remains unidentified, but not forgotten by the community. Searchers in the city have banded together to try and find out the identity of Buffalo Woman, but have been unsuccessful to date. Addiction is a terrible thing. Those of you who listened from the beginning probably know my own journey with addiction, but as a light refresher, I did not set out to become an addict, but that's exactly what happened. I've been in recovery for the last 12 years. What's difficult for me is the memories, or I guess lack thereof. It wasn't until I was in recovery for 6 years that I sat down one day and did a rough timeline. I thought I was only in active addiction for maybe 6 months. But as it turns out, I was actively using drugs and living a high risk lifestyle for 3 years. I dropped out of college. I lost contact with my friends and family. I left home and luckily had family members I could stay with. I've begged on street corners. I've gone to parties with absolute strangers. I've been sexually assaulted. I have so little memory from that time, but what I do remember is enough to impact me greatly. I was not myself, but rather someone fueled by addiction. Every day was the same. Wake up and find out how I could get more drugs for that night, using any tactic I could. It was a life with no timelines, no safety, no regard for my own life. Long story short, I hit my rock bottom and clawed my way out of everything. I rebuilt my life from the lowest low, and I now own a home, have a loving partner, and two wonderful children. Despite everything going so well for me, I will not lie. There are moments where the addiction uses its voice and tells me just using one time won't hurt. It tries to persuade me and put me back into that reality. This is why I'm such an advocate for addiction awareness. I know many people are disgusted by drug addiction. They think that people who are struggling with substance use are less than, that they deserve every bad thing that happens to them. How dare they choose getting high over their children and their family members? Just trust me. Addiction is an ugly parasite that latches on and changes you. I say all of this because I know how easy it will be for some people to judge Morgan Beatrice Harris. And I very much dislike focusing on the challenges a person experiences to illustrate who they are. But it's also a stark reality that's necessary to shine a light on. Morgan Beatrice Harris was born in 1983 and was a member of Long Plain First Nation. She had a difficult life from the very beginning. She was a foster kid after being removed from her mother's house. And at the age of 18, Morgan welcomed a daughter named Cambria and over the years had 4 additional children. There was drug use, but the family lived together in a house in Winnipeg's West End. Everything came crashing down, though, when Morgan's daughter Cambria was about 6 years old. Unfortunately, police showed up at their house and took custody of the children, declaring Morgan unfit. Cambria suspects someone had called Child and Family Services about Morgan's substance abuse. The sad part is, after being taken away from a mother who loved them, Cambria and her siblings were put into foster care or group homes. These were often worse than the home Cambria came from, and she'd spend many a night hiding in her room, hoping to escape some of the violence and chaos occurring just outside her door. And all the while, the children would only want one thing: to see their mother. Cambria would meet up with Morgan for unsupervised visits, even though this wasn't allowed in the eyes of the law. Sadly, it was clear to Cambria that her mother had died when her children were taken from her. Something inside her had changed drastically. The harsh reality of Morgan's living and addiction situation were written all over her face in various bruises and cuts, all inked on by the men who wanted sex and would offer drugs if she complied. But it didn't take long for the men's true intentions to shine through. And sadly, Morgan would often be savagely beaten. Maybe it was because she was a woman. Maybe it was because she was Indigenous. Likely, it's because of both. I was able to locate 2 photographs of Morgan Beatrice Harris. In one, she's a fresh-faced teenager smirking at the school photographer. She has close-cropped light brown hair, a few inches off her shoulders in length. Her eyes are dark brown with a glint of mischief. Her nose is large for her face, but not unattractive. Full lips turned up and a cheeky smile create dimples in her cheeks, showing off her high cheekbones. She looks like she has a silly personality, that she loves to laugh. According to Cambria, quote, "She was silly. She was fun. People loved to be around her," end quote. The other photograph is undated, but it's not hard to tell it was taken in the latter part of Morgan's life. It's painful to see the transition from that bright, vibrant 18-year-old girl in the yearbook photo. A life of hard living has aged Morgan. Her eyes speak of horrors, of pain. There is not a trace of a smile on her lips, and perhaps that's the hardest comparison of all. I can only imagine what life must have been like for Morgan. And tragically, Morgan Beatrice Harris, a sister, an auntie, a mother, a grandmother, vanished on May 1st, 2022. Mercedes Myron, often affectionately referred to as Sadies, was born on November 9th, 1995. That would make her and I Scorpio sisters. Mercedes belonged to the Long Plain First Nation, west of Winnipeg. Photos of Mercedes show a beautiful young woman with an angled face and fresh complexion. She has large, rounded, dark-colored eyes, long, thick, dark hair with a cute little side bang, and prominent but somehow still cute as a button nose. Her lips are full, and in many pictures, her smile shines so brightly, accented by dimples in her cheeks. There was rarely a time when Mercedes wasn't smiling, which just added to her charm and charisma. She was known as a jokester with a silly nature that could bring even the most straight-faced people into a smile of their own. One of her favorite things to do was dance and sing with her sister and cousins. It seemed to be rare in this day and age, but Mercedes was truly a kind and loving friend who was very protective of her children and family members. She also condoned violence and wasn't afraid to make that known. Mercedes, like many others, had fallen on hard times when her children were taken into foster care. I can only imagine what that must have felt like, and sadly, Mercedes ended up on the streets. It was here that she would meet her untimely end. The last sighting of Mercedes was via video surveillance obtained by police. It was May 4th, and she was shown walking in a Winnipeg parking lot with a man. She was 26 years old. She would never be seen alive again. Rebecca Contois was born January 27, 1998, and was a member of Ochichak-Kosipi First Nation. Rebecca grew up with 7 siblings, as well as her mother and father, and had many childhood friends. Photographs of Rebecca reveal a beautiful woman with high cheekbones and prominent brows. Her almond-shaped eyes are dark and mysterious, and her toothy smile illuminates her face. It was easy to fall in love with Rebecca. She had a laugh that was hugely contagious and would have everyone laughing with her. Her smile was said to truly light up a room and turn the most quiet gatherings into one of love and laughter. She was a very generous person, always ready to lend a hand for anyone. Rebecca also had a love for nature and all its creatures, often going for long walks and soaking up all of the rich beauty Mother Earth provides. Rebecca was easygoing. She could spend a lazy day watching movies or listening to music full blast while unleashing her artistic ability by painting works of art. At some point in her life, Rebecca moved to Winnipeg and lived there. I I was unable to find much about Rebecca's life, but in one article, a friend was quoted as saying she had gotten involved with the wrong sort of people. That could mean many things, so I don't want to make any assumptions because, as we all know, assumptions are not facts. Rebecca was last seen in February of 2022 in downtown Winnipeg. Family and friends were concerned for her welfare and reported her missing. She would be found, but in one of the most horrific ways possible. At just the tender age of 24 on May 15, 2022, Rebecca was savagely murdered. Before all of these horrific murders, there was Diane, whose real name is protected, and Jeremy. Diane was living on the streets when she met Jeremy. She was addicted to meth and was looking for a place to stay for the night, but many of the mission services offering beds were full. A man approached Diane one cold winter's night and said his name was David Pliskin. In reality, his name was Jeremy, but Diane wouldn't know that until later. Jeremy offered Diane a place to stay that night, and Diane knew of the risks involved with going to a strange man's house at night. But the thought of a comfortable bed and a chance to get high was too big a draw for her. She left with him. What developed was a relationship of sorts, but with a power dynamic. Jeremy would frequently have rage-filled outbursts and behaved in odd ways. But Diane, who had lived the lonely life of being on the streets, tried to ignore these things because at least she had a place to stay, a person to talk to. Jeremy had some fairly hate-filled views. His conversations and social media content were full of white supremacy and anti-Semitic content. It wasn't just the posts that were disturbing. Jeremy also claimed to be a member of a far-right group called Holy Europe. This group appears to be a thinly veiled hate group that operates under the agenda of restoring Europe to the year pre-1054 in Christian values with a preservation of the white race, patriarchy, and etc. They call things like individualism and conformism, interracism, and multiculturalism as being associated to, quote, seeds of Satan, unquote. Canadian issues were present in his social media posts as well. For instance, he proclaimed the residential school grave sites that have been found were fake news, and he also said that the stories coming forward from survivors of residential schools were created by the government to mislead Canadians. Jeremy and Diane were married in 2018, but it wasn't a fairy tale wedding. According to Diane, the ceremony took place in their apartment, and she was extremely high on meth. The marriage was fraught with abuse, doled out by Jeremy. Often, Diane called police to help her with these horrific rages, but Jeremy was, for some reason, never charged. Diane also admits that Jeremy would rape her when she was sleeping. Apparently, this was a trend for Jeremy. The story goes he had a fiancée a few years prior to Diane, and he would also give this fiancée sleeping medication and then rape her while she slept. He told Diane he had a fetish called Sleeping Beauty Syndrome. In any domestic violence case, it's so easy for us to say, why did she stay so long? But the reality is, leaving an abuser can sometimes be the most dangerous time for the victim. It's not that easy. I will be doing a domestic violence episode at some point in the future, and we'll get more into this. But the question everybody should be asking isn't why did she stay, but rather, why did he abuse? Diane suffered terribly while in the relationship with Jeremy. There was not just the frequent outbursts, his need for control, and the physical abuse. He would do things like try to suffocate her with a pillow, as well as make her watch violent pornography that contained themes of necrophilia. Chillingly, Jeremy once told Diane, quote, If anything happened to her, he planned to keep her remains in a closet and perform sex acts on them, end quote, until the stench of the decomposition was unbearable. It was 2021 when Diane left for good. She said she was going to her mother's to do laundry and just never came back. Good fucking riddance. It wasn't long after they'd split that Jeremy got an apartment in North Kildonan, a neighborhood in the city's north end. And not long after he obtained a place to stay, Jeremy went back to old habits. You see, prior to meeting Diane in 2018, Jeremy had been homeless for a time. Maybe this was where he got the idea to offer temporary housing for those in need. He had experienced that life. It can be lonely and sad and desperate. When he secured an apartment of his own, he would often visit the area of the city that has a number of shelters and people down on their luck. It sounds like he could be a good Samaritan, right? But I think we all know he is far from. Shelter staff are trained to be wary of predatory people because the reality is predators know their prey and they know it well. Vulnerable people in society are easy prey for depraved individuals. Jeremy would hang around the shelters and offer females a place to stay, shower, eat, whatever would get them off the streets and into his house. It's how he met Diane, and it's how he met all of the other women we've mentioned in this episode. Jeremy is a serial killer, and Rebecca Contois would be the beginning of the end for him.
Location of the emergency. I was walking on the back lane of Edison, and at 253 Edison, the apartment building, in the bin, the garbage bin, I found a woman's head in a green, in two green bags. Okay, 253 Edison, where's the bin? The bin is in the back of the apartment building.
In case you were unable to hear the audio in that recording, that was actually footage of a 911 call that I obtained from an APTN news article. On May 16th, a person on Edison Avenue was scavenging in the back of an apartment building garbage bin and spotted something in the bin. Suspicious, the person investigated further and then called police. What you heard on the recording was the person indicating that he'd found a woman's head in a garbage bag. It would later be confirmed the garbage receptacle contained the partial human remains of Rebecca Contois in what police described as, quote, a horrifically grisly scene, end quote. The investigation began and police obtained video surveillance footage of a man in that area whom they deemed a person of interest. Only 2 days later, on May 18th, police charged 35-year-old Jeremy Skibicki with first-degree murder. Shortly after this, on June 2nd, 2022, Winnipeg police would begin searching the local landfill, the one specifically on Brady Road called Brady Road Resource Management Facility. Understandably, searching a landfill is no easy task. It can be very hazardous to searchers due to all of the debris and garbage. 12 days after the search began, police confirmed they found human remains, which were later confirmed to be additional partial remains of Rebecca Contois. While in custody, Jeremy was interrogated by police. They showed him the photograph still of the man in the surveillance video who appeared to be transporting trash bags to various garbage bins. Jeremy denied it was him. Police then showed Jeremy photographs of Rebecca's partial remains. Jeremy said he couldn't look because it was disturbing. But just moments later, Jeremy praised the police for doing a good job with their investigation. He says, quote, "The world that we're living in is sick. I was driven to do stuff like this because I was so spent emotionally. I killed 4 people." end quote. This was a huge breakthrough for police who hadn't yet explored the possibility of other victims. They kept him talking, and Jeremy began to offer insight into his mindset. He claims he was high on mushrooms when he killed Buffalo Woman, and was high on meth when he killed Mercedes, Morgan, and Rebecca. Showing no remorse, no emotion really at all, of Jeremy getting caught, he said, quote, "I guess I just got sloppy," end quote. The case is currently before the courts, and extensive media coverage has shed light on the horrific ways these 4 women were savagely murdered. Jeremy would overpower the women by putting them in a chokehold or strangling them, and then he would drown them in his bathtub. He admitted that some of the victims would be left in the bathtub for a long period of time, hours in fact, and to mask the smell, he would pour in Pine Sol cleaner. It's unknown what he did with the bodies of Buffalo Woman and Morgan Harris, but he admitted to dismembering Mercedes Myron and Rebecca Contois. He disposed of their bodies in garbage dumpsters. He also admitted that Rebecca fought back, and she fought back hard. He said she just wouldn't die. He said, quote, "She took so long to die, I probably crushed her throat," end quote. He clearly shows no remorse at all, and perhaps even more disturbing was his justification for why he did what he did. His motivation? After a bout of laughter, he said it was because of, quote, "hatred and disgust," end quote. He went on to say he had committed these acts to, quote, "protect the survival of my people if we don't start doing things like this." His people and his belief system is the Aryan race, the superior race. His thoughts, not mine. Jeremy believed God had called him to kill, and his lawyers have asked that he be found not criminally responsible for the murders due to a mental disorder. His lawyers argue he has post-traumatic stress disorder and borderline personality disorder. Evidence coming out in court shows, in my opinion, he was not mentally incapacitated when he set out to find women to murder. Among the evidence is Jeremy's own admission that he had harmed animals in his youth, specifically killing a rabbit and torturing cats to death. Everything about this so far, squad, is screaming a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, frequently called psychopathy. But I'm not a doctor, so I obviously can't say for certain. He seems to have a lot of the markers for this, however, so I'm very curious to see what else comes out in court. Not criminally responsible would mean Jeremy could admit to killing the women, but that he can't be responsible for it legally because he would not have been able to understand what he was doing. Evidence so far, though, is pointing to the contrary. In fact, police collected over 560,000 pieces of data from Jeremy's computer, which was seized from his apartment during a search warrant in the initial investigation. Here is the timeline of internet searches completed on the seized computer, as well as the relevance. 1. On March 15th, 2022, on the day Buffalo Woman is believed to have been killed, searches on the computer are about DNA. Specifically, when police can obtain your DNA and how long the DNA can be kept on file. There was a search for a bus route from Jeremy's apartment building to a store in a different neighborhood that sells packaging materials, in this case, plastic wrap. This has direct correlation to a later search on the computer on that same day, where the user of the computer had asked whether or not fingerprints can be obtained from plastic wrap, as well as how well bleach works to destroy fingerprint evidence. 2. The computer was used to search how long it takes for hot water to come back. On May 1st, the day police believe Jeremy killed Morgan Harris. The relevance of this is that Jeremy admitted to drowning Morgan in his bathtub. 3. Several searches were made regarding missing people, and a missing poster for Morgan Harris was accessed by the computer on May 17, 2022. 4. Jeremy and Rebecca had apparently been friends on Facebook. In fact, he claimed to have been in a relationship with her, but later said that she was using him for a place to stay. He unfriended her on May 15th, 2022, which is believed to be when he had murdered her. The computer was then used to search and view a news article regarding the discovery of Rebecca's remains. This doesn't sound like the actions of a person who wasn't aware of what they were doing. This sounds like a cold and calculated killer who wouldn't stop until he was caught. Jeremy admitted this also during his police interview. He was asked if he would have stopped in reference to killing. Jeremy simply stated the word no. I suppose with an answer like that, it should not be surprising that Winnipeg police confirmed that during the forensic examination of Jeremy's apartment, they not only found the DNA of the 4 Indigenous women he is on trial for killing, they also found DNA profiles of an additional 12 women. Let's be clear here, though, for a second. Finding DNA does not a murder make. However, given Jeremy's motivation, history of violence against women, and admission that he wouldn't stop killing if he wasn't caught, I'm scared to see what else comes of this. Police also confirmed that 9 of the 16 female DNA profiles were not identified by police, meaning their DNA is not on file with the police service. So to break down this number, 16 DNA profiles were found. 4 were identified as belonging to Buffalo women Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Rebecca Contois. 3 other profiles were identified. 2 were not named, and the third was revealed. The third woman, Andrea Cedarwall, was a mother of 3 and grew up in Kenora, Ontario. She did not die by Jeremy's hand, but according to an obituary posted by Dignity Memorial, Andrea died on December 8th, 2023, with her daughters and family by her side. She was only 34 years old. So this leaves 9 DNA profiles that have yet to be identified. Police have yet to determine where Buffalo woman's remains are located, but they do have an idea of where Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron might be. They believe their remains are located at the Prairie Green landfill. But sadly, they advised searching for the women would not be feasible. This announcement came from police on December 6th, 2022. The decision sparked outrage among the Indigenous community who feel that time and time again their lives are shown to be invaluable. If police believe the remains of 2 women are located in the landfill, every effort should be taken to locate them so they can be given back to their families. It can be difficult to understand why one landfill was searched, resulting in finding Rebecca's remains, yet another landfill isn't in scope to bring closure to the victims' families. Winnipeg Police Inspector Cam McKidd, who had been involved in the search of the Brady Road landfill, said Brady Road was searched because police were able to ascertain the general area Rebecca's remains might have been found. Because of this, they were able to divert trucks from dumping additional garbage in that spot. Therefore, although the search itself was challenging in its own right, they were at least able to search through less refuse because not a lot had been dumped there. The reason why Prairie Green is different is because police deduced the remains of the 2 additional victims were deposited into that landfill, but so much time had elapsed between when the garbage pickup and drop-off was. This is relevant because in that month-long period, around 10,000 loads of refuse were dumped into the landfill. And though I'm not sure how this would happen, maybe from slaughterhouses, but 1,500 tons of animal remains were also added to the landfill during that month-long period. Not only that, but police can't pinpoint the location of the remains because the truck that would have picked up the dumpster to drop off at the landfill didn't have a GPS system. A final and extremely challenging aspect is that the garbage was compacted with 9,000 tons of wet, heavy construction clay. It was on December 8th, 2022, just 2 days after this announcement that police would not be searching the landfill, the families and communities fought back. demanding a search to the landfill regardless of the challenges it presented. Operations were then paused at the Prairie Green landfill. Essentially, a cost analysis needed to be completed, which the federal government agreed to pay for. By February of 2023, the cost had dropped from being completely covered by the government to the government willing to provide $500,000 towards the cost of the feasibility study. It was May 12, 2023, when the results of the study were released. The search was deemed feasible despite the risks involved. Risks include exposure to toxic chemicals and other hazardous materials, as well as the potential to cause landslides during the excavations. The study estimates the search could take up to 3 years to complete and cost $84 million up to $184 million to complete. And this, of course, doesn't even guarantee the remains of Morgan Harris or Mercedes Myron will be found. The dollar value sounds staggering, $184 million. But can you put a price on laying a loved one to rest? Kathy Merrick, Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba's Chiefs, believes the search should occur no matter the cost. She suggests if the searches aren't completed, First Nations people across Canada are going to be given the message that the government is okay with disposing Indigenous women in landfills. Families of the slain women agree. The search should go on regardless of cost because you cannot put a price on closure and dignity. By July of 2023, the Progressive Conservative government in Manitoba publicly states it does not support searching the landfill. This is met by protests when just a day later, on July 6, 2023, protesters set up roadblocks at the entrance of the Brady Road landfill. Their goal is to demand the government search the Prairie Green landfill. This caused considerable issues for the city, and by July 18th, a judge granted an injunction for the city to tear down the blockade and have protesters cleared from the location. Interesting side note, the Progressive Conservative government ran a campaign during the election in September 2023 where they posted propaganda about how the party stood firm on not searching the landfill. They lost the election, and Heather Stephenson, who was premier but lost her riding, later apologized for the ad campaign in favor of not searching the landfill. The debate on the how and when and who would fund the search was continued through until January 26, 2024, when a new report was released. This new feasibility report cut the cost down from a projected $184 million price tag down to about $90 million. In March of 2024, the federal and provincial governments each agreed to provide $20 million to the search of this landfill. And now, with bated breath, we wait. We wait to see what the outcome of Jeremy's trial will be. We wait to see what will come of the landfill search when it happens. Jeremy is due back in court June 6th. I will post an update via TikTok when the verdict is made public. If you want to help with the landfill search efforts, go to searchthelandfill.com and look at all the ways that you can help. My sincerest condolences go out to the families, friends, and community members of Buffalo woman Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Rebecca Contois. No more stolen sisters. These women were loved and had love in their hearts. They deserved more than they received at the hands of a depraved killer. Okay, squad, I think we'll wrap this episode up. Thank you for listening to this episode. I really appreciate it. These episodes are so emotionally taxing to research and write, and my heart fills with sorrow for the families impacted by such horrible loss. If you're listening to this episode and you have a story you want to share about Buffalo woman, Morgan, Mercedes, or Rebecca, please contact me. I want to make sure victims are never forgotten, and I would love the opportunity to share about these women and their lives. Maybe it's a memory you have or something you want to express about the impact they had on you. Stay tuned next month for more episodes and bonus content. And remember, stay safe and be kind to each other.
Think of us now and then, and pray this tragedy will end. They are lost, they are alone, they are far, far from their home. They have families who love and care, and forever